Hey, everybody, welcome in once again. Another episode of the StokKon+Braverman podcast series, Therapy or Divorce. Today, we're going to talk about parenting plans with Hanit Simon. She is a family law attorney at StokKon+Braverman in Fort Lauderdale, Florida, and Donnie Frank, a family therapist in New York. And let's start with you, Hanit. When a divorce is being finalized and there are children under the age of 18, sometimes a parenting plan is necessary to keep everybody on the same page. Walk us through the way that you put together that plan, and do you consult someone like Donnie when you're putting together that plan?
Yes, absolutely. So in the state of Florida, parenting plan is a requirement when you have minor dependent children. And so we can make the parenting plan as unique as each individual child or family, as long as, it comports with the law and it's of course in the best interest of the children. So when we put this together, we often like to include, unique situations that can, we hope, address some of the issues that we're seeing in real time as we're putting this together that we anticipate may carry out into the future. And so if the child is already in therapy or the family's in therapy, we can even put provisions for that to continue oftentimes in these plans, provided that they're in agreement or the court is willing to adopt these plans. And so we oftentimes try to contemplate what are the issues in the case. The parents ended up in a divorce because they've had these issues, whatever they may be, and how can we best protect the children from some of the ongoing issues with the parents and their fighting, and how do we keep that away from the children? Are there issues involving anything from guns being, in the home, and how do we keep those locked up and safe? Do we have issues presenting with corporal punishment of children and parents with different perspectives? History of domestic violence there. Do we have issues where a new person, a new significant other may be introduced to a child or another individual who may be potentially problematic, and how do we address this? So we try to be proactive in these plans. Donnie, do you see some of these issues in your practice that when you're counseling people, whether they're going through the divorce process or after the divorce process, that could be potentially worked into parenting plans from your perspective?
And Donnie, before you answer that question, also from a mental health perspective, how important is it for both parents to actually adhere to that parenting plan?
I think the answer to that is self-explanatory. One of the things that we want people to consider when they first get married is, although they may be very different in a lot of areas, but we would like them to have the same values and the same general direction of where they want to, how they're going to make their decisions for themselves, for the family, for their kids. And that shouldn't stop, even if the marriage terminates. Your vision and your values for your children should still be aligned. And if they're not aligned, there has to be some kind of mechanism. Now, you mentioned, it's essential. Essential if you want your kids to grow up balanced to the best that they can when they're growing up into different homes. Obviously, there are challenges. Each one still has their styles, and as long as you're living in the same home and you have a relationship, you kind of work off each other and you accommodate each other. But when you're in separate homes, any differences that existed are just going to become more accentuated. So the parenting plan is huge. I'm actually curious, in Florida, who is it generally the lawyer that facilitates this plan, or would you say it's therapists?
Yeah, so in Florida, it's typically the lawyer. So I think it's good practice, if there is ongoing therapy, to try to get some recommendations from a therapist, if we can. And if that's the case, or we, as family lawyers, have to craft these agreements. So it's, it depends on the circumstances of the case and the issues that present.
Right. So I wish that I was more involved in making parenting plans with parents that are divorced. I will get calls from mediators to find out what I think about different issues that the couples are, the divorced couple is at odds with. But But this really is to the point that I think that, unfortunately, not enough divorced couples are are recognizing that they have a common mission the rest of their lives, especially as kids who are minors. They have a common mission that's not going away because they got divorced. Look, what can I say? Ideally, if they came in and they worked it through, but I think it probably ends up being the lawyer's task, because there's the strength, the backing of the law that gets them to sit down and have to work it out.
Yeah, and we can't obviously anticipate every future issue that the parents may face or the children may encounter. So we do our best. I mean, there is something called collaborative divorce. That's a process that does often involve a mental health practitioner to help craft a parenting plan. But outside of that process, there isn't a requirement, unfortunately, in the state of Florida, for a mental health practitioner to weigh in on a parenting plan. But that being said, if it has become an issue of the case, we are hopeful that there will be another professional. It takes a village, as they say, to raise children. And so we try to bring in a guardian ad litem, sometimes an attorney ad litem, on behalf of the children where we do have more pronounced issues. So, that does come into play, but it is a challenge. And so, sometimes our family cases involving minor children come back to us many times over, where the parents can't reach an agreement. And the default is that we do trust the parents in most instances to have what's called shared parental responsibility, which is the shared decision making on the important decisions for those kids here in the state of Florida. And that's usually where most cases end up, outside of, again, those extreme cases. But do the parents follow through and connect to reach these agreements? Not always, right? So that's where we get into, we look to the parenting plan. A well-crafted parenting plan, but from professionals, is very important for this reason. And the more professionals that you can consult, I think, more often you come up with something that you can truly follow for the course of the child's, the childhood of this particular child or the children in the family. But, if we have to return to court on these issues, sometimes it's not properly addressed in the parenting plan. And you look back, could it have been, could we have anticipated this issue? Could we have addressed this at the outset? Those are the types of questions. So I think my goal as a professional is to come up with a plan that's really as comprehensive as possible. And so I do reach out to, family therapists in the process.
Well, I think that, look, if you have the mechanism and if the law requires it, that's amazing. I think if maybe, if in this conversation, if we can have influence on the listenership or the people watching it, it would be, even if you're not in the States where they require legally this parenting plan, just to really think about that. The greatest gift you can give your kids after you've gotten divorced is to be unified in your parenting. And as much as it takes a lot of courage, a lot of strength, a lot of dealing with very strong issues, strong feelings, but that's the greatest gift you can give your kids. And sometimes we don't realize that those little kids that we think we could manipulate or move around, they become old and smart pretty quickly, and they pick up. So it's in the best interest in the short term and in the long term for the relationship, your relationship with your kids in the long term, that they can look to you and say, you know what, my mother, my father, they were really out for my best interest every step of the way. I could tell it, I could smell it. We don't think our kids pick up on certain things. They can get the nuances. They get everything. So if that alone, to address to deal with this issue and really follow the guidance that is given, that makes this experience for the child the healthiest experience.
Yeah. And I mean, as much as we unfortunately can't look into the crystal ball and learn the future, but by going through, professionals who've had this experience, who can see some of these personality traits at the outset, who can help you to maybe identify some of the problems and that may carry out into the future, it's helpful to have a very well-crafted parenting plan to assist you.
If we only could have divorcing parents have such a civil conversation between them, I think we would be able to solve a lot of issues. And that probably goes to opposing counsel, and probably goes towards therapists on both sides of the equation, because the conversation that you guys have is just absolutely wonderful. You really complement each other in giving each other perspective. And Donnie, I loved when you said maybe states that don't require this should pay attention to this conversation and see parents and attorneys insist upon it as well. So that will do it for this episode of Therapy or Divorce, Parenting Plan. StokKon+Braverman bringing you this podcast series. Hanit Simon with StokKon+Braverman, family law attorney, and Donnie Frank, who is a family therapist in New York. Thanks so much for being with us, and we'll see you next time.